Hello everyone, it's Emma and welcome back to my channel. Today, we are going to be unpacking overconsumption versus overpopulation. Because a few weeks ago in part 2 of my biodiversity series, I briefly mentioned how I don't believe overpopulation is that big of an issue as most people make it out to be. I think it's overconsumption. And there were some people in the comments who were peacefully debating, and I love having peaceful debates like that because then it makes me want to research it more. So that's exactly what I did. I took that information and I researched it more to bring you today's video, in which I might come to a different conclusion, I might come to the same conclusion. You'll have to stay tuned to the end to find out. But basically what I had said in the other video is how a lot of people play the overpopulation card. They're like, global warming is a thing because of overpopulation. And I think that's just a way to point the fingers at other people instead of ourselves. Because we as Westerners, especially Americans, consume way too much. Especially if you look at the US compared to other nations of equal or larger size, our carbon footprint is significantly larger than those other countries. Real quick thing, before we get too far in, if you'd like to read along, you can do that with the blog post link down below. Or if I talk too fast for you, you can change the speed of this video using the gear icon right down here. So basically what I mean is that some families in other countries have 4, 5, 6, 10, 12 children, and they're still not consuming nearly as much as American households with only one child, even 2 or 3. Considerably less children are being born in the United States than other countries, but our carbon footprint is so much higher. And that's kind of the argument that I was going for. So for example, children in Malawi consume about 0.07 to 0.1 metric tons of CO2 annually, which is not a lot. Meanwhile, American children consume about 58 metric tons of CO2 per year. And some people might think that that's not a good argument because the culture of Malawi and America are so different. But we're a little more equal to those in China. A child born in the US will create 7 times more CO2 than a child born in China. And that was the point I was getting at in that video. I kind of poorly expressed it, so I really want to break it down here. The first thing we need to talk about though is that we consume that much because of our privilege. Because we live in a place where we can get 1-day shipping from Amazon, we can fly, we have a car, each of us has a car. That causes our carbon footprint to be so much higher because of because literally the country that we were born in or choose to live in. While people in non-westernized countries typically do not have these luxuries or don't want them and continue to live off the land more sustainably, would our carbon footprint lower if we ourselves went and lived in Malawi, if we went and lived in China or India or any other country with a lower carbon footprint? Probably, because in those countries we don't have access to all of the same privileges that we do in the United States. And you could ask the same question in reverse. Would someone from Malawi who comes to live in the US all of a sudden get a higher carbon footprint? Almost certainly, as long as I had the financial means to, have those privileges. So it's not necessarily the people that we need to be putting the blame on. We need to be putting the blame on the culture that we're grown up in, and we need to alter that culture to be more sustainable. So please keep in mind that this is all my unprofessional experience, my unprofessional opinions, but it is based off scientific research, and all of these sources I used will be linked down below. So I encourage you to take all of this information with a grain of salt, do your own research, have some debates down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this. There's still a lot more to unpack. I just want to put this here for people who might not make it all the way to the end of this video. And you don't need to take my opinion and make it your own opinion. You can form your own opinions too, based on your own research. So let's continue to talk about overconsumption. With great privilege comes great responsibility. We are privileged to live in a country with Amazon and malls and airplanes and cars, but we need to use these things wisely and responsibly. We can't keep flying willy-nilly, and we can't keep buying new item after new item and just throwing it in the trash. I'm not saying we all have to become minimalists and zero wasters and only make enough trash to fill a single mason jar, but we need to be conscious about our choices. Do we need every single baby accessory brand new? No. Try to find them secondhand. Do we need every single baby accessory period? Probably not. And we need to think about this stuff too, not just when we populate the earth. Think about our everyday actions. Do I need that new jacket? Do I need that new car? Do I need to take a plane to my vacation or can I drive? There are so many questions that we need to think about every single day in our lives, but by answering them responsibly, we can live a lot more sustainably as a society. Like I said, it's not just about our babies either, but also teaching our children from a young age to be conscious consumers and to be responsible consumers. We need to start teaching our children that this earth is not ours. This is not my planet. This is our collective planet. And that my actions here on my little island in Japan can potentially affect people all across the globe. We also need to teach them about healthy consumer habits like shopping secondhand, donating, reusing, upcycling, recycling, trading, and so forth. And of course, we need to learn that stuff for ourselves before we even teach our children and young people. We need to focus on making a circular economy, which is a more sustainable economy. Because of how much we buy for our children, they can add up to 9,441 metric tons of CO2 to our lifetime carbon footprint. This is 20 times more than someone can save by driving a better car, recycling, and using energy efficient appliances. All those positive actions really don't have a positive impact if we keep being wasteful for the children that we're having. And I'm not saying to not have children, that's not the answer here. The answer is to have children responsibly. And what I mean is, like I said, don't buy every single baby accessory because it's the new hot thing. Think about buying some baby stuff secondhand. Think about seeing if someone can give it to you as a hand-me-down, or just not buying every single thing on the market. The US has the largest population among developed countries, and it is expected to double to roughly 600 million people within the next 80 years. Currently, the US produces more CO2 per capita than Europe by 2 times and 5 times the global average. So yes, our overconsumption is clearly to blame. But this will continue to get worse the more children they have. And that is why I think that overpopulation and overconsumption really do go hand in hand, but there's more to that in a little bit. Here's this great quote from theconversation.com. More importantly, focusing on human numbers obscures the true driver of many of our ecological woes. That is, the waste and inequality generated by modern capitalism and its focus on endless growth and profit accumulation. Now, I don't want to point fingers here, but fossil fuel companies produce 1/3 of the world's CO2 emissions. And the world's wealthiest 10% of people contribute the same amount of CO2 as the poorest 50%, meaning that the wealthiest 10% and the lowest 50% of people, based on their money, both contribute 10% to the global CO2 emissions. And again, this is why I think that overconsumption really is the main issue and not necessarily overpopulation. So here's the tricky thing. When people look at population graphs and CO2 graphs, they line up really well. So it does look like they are perfectly linked. They might be, but we need to look at where that CO2 is coming from each individual person. Emissions are tied to income. People in the wealthiest countries emit roughly 50 times more than that of a person in a quote poor country. So yes, CO2 rises as population rises, but why? Imagine if there was no industrial revolution. Do you think as population increased that CO2 would increase? Probably not. Do you think that if the catalog or the internet was never invented, that we would be consuming this much and CO2 would be as high as it is even with the same population? Probably not. So yes, they are related if you look at this chart, but I still think overconsumption is at least partially to blame, if not entirely. So obviously, yes, the more children we have, the more we have to produce to provide for them, but we need to think about how we're producing it and how we're disposing of it, which we're not doing it responsibly. So really, it's just all intertwined. We can point fingers at one or the other, but we should be focusing on both. Something else to note here, especially with overpopulation, is that the more crowded the earth gets, the more trees we have to cut down to make more homes and to make more space available for people to live, which means that the less trees we have planted, the less trees that are growing, the less carbon that can be sequestered from the air. The UN predicts another 2 billion people will occupy the earth by 2050 and another 3.5 billion by 2100. That's just 80 years away. That means there would be over 10 billion people on the earth. And therefore, not to mention, the more the earth warms, the more the ice melts, the higher the sea levels will get, meaning we'll have to be pushed back and back and back more inland and not so much on the coast. Well, it'll be the new coast. But that just means there's less space for us to live with 10 billion people on the earth because of climate change. Plus, living anywhere near the equator in about 30 years will just be unbearable. Because of overpopulation, we're running out of space. Clearly, there's more people inhabiting the earth, but with climate change, there's also less space to live on the earth because it's going to be too hot near the equator and our coasts are going to flood, leading us to all move more inland and more north. So really, we're displacing ourselves, and that's something I'd like to talk about in another video. I'm going to leave it there for today. Now that we've gotten most of the facts out of the way, will population control stop climate change? No. I don't think it will. Just like if we quit emitting every single ounce of CO2 right now, the earth would still continue to rise because there's so much CO2 already in air. If we quit populating, every single person decided to quit having children right now, we would still have climate change. It doesn't matter if we have 5 billion more people on the earth in 80 years or 0 more people on the earth in 80 years if we don't change our habits. So I do think population control, rather choosing to have less children, could be a benefit to the earth because we won't have to produce as much. And it really is tricky, especially when you look at those two graphs of the population and the CO2, how they line up, because our population has been constantly growing for hundreds of years, and the population has even doubled, since my parents have been born. But something we do know for a fact is that consuming less will lead to less CO2 emissions. And I guess one way to consume less is to not reproduce. But, again, if we have 2 wasteful people and they have a child, obviously that child is going to be born into a wasteful household. Those people are going to buy way too much stuff for their child. But even if those 2 people did not have a child, they would still be in their wasteful ways, producing so much more CO2 than people in so many other areas of the world. So that is why I personally think that overpopulation is not the issue, but rather that we need to change our habits. Yes, overpopulation might be an issue. I still am not on board with it. I went into this research thinking that I was gonna change my mind, that overpopulation is an issue. But I did all this research and my mind has not changed. If anything, I am more convinced that overpopulation is not an issue, at least not the issue. And obviously, there's not a one-size-fits-all issue for climate change. It's so many things tied up all together. Like I keep saying, everything is so intertwined. Just like saving biodiversity will save climate change, reducing population will probably reduce overconsumption, but we don't really know. And also, like I outlined in my biodiversity series, planting trees and cutting carbon and halting deforestation are some of the key things we can do to stop climate change. But that stuff only helps sequester carbon. We need to stop emitting carbon as well. We overconsume before having children, and then we teach our 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 children to overconsume too, and it just blows out of proportion. So again, they are all intertwined. If we have 6 kids responsibly and we teach them to be conscious consumers, yes, that's still a lot of children and they're gonna still consume because we all have to consume, but they're gonna have a much lower carbon footprint than 6 children who are taught that this world is all about me, and I'm just gonna buy stuff and throw it away and not care about the planet. Something else to note though is that most scientists predict that our population will cap at about 9 to 11 billion people, which is not much more than we already have, honestly. Can the Earth sustain 11 billion people? It's possible, but not at the current rate of consumption, honestly. That's 4 billion more people than we already have, and we're already running out of resources. If you haven't heard of Earth Overshoot Day, we're allotted 365 days worth of resources, enough for the Earth to replenish itself. As a collective society on the entire globe, use that by approximately mid-August. So basically what that means is that even right now, at our current rate of consumption with the current amount of people on the globe, we still cannot sustain ourselves. We're gonna run out of resources. So obviously the more people we have on this planet, the quicker we're gonna run out of those resources. So maybe that's why people think overpopulation is an issue, but I still see that as overconsumption. If you're a strong believer in overpopulation being an issue, I'd love to hear your reasons down below. Just keep it civil. I'm just still so convinced it's overconsumption. So if you have differing views, definitely let me know. So we're already seeing this happen in Japan. People are not having enough children to actually keep up the population of Japan, but we're also starting to see that in the US as well. A lot of millennials and Gen Z are choosing not to have children, and the same thing is kind of starting to happen, where in maybe 40 years or so, we might actually start to see the population decline for the first time ever. It's hard to say, it's all prediction, whether overpopulation will continue to be an issue or not. I'm sure we've all read a dystopian book or watched a dystopian movie where the government says people can only have 1 or 2 children. So obviously in those types of books and movies, the children have to go into hiding and the parents have to try to keep them a secret, and then eventually someone finds out. Obviously that's never gonna work. When people are told to do things, they don't do them out of spite. If people wanna have 2 or 3 or 4 children, they're gonna have that many children, whether the government tells them to have only 1 or not. So I think what needs to happen, instead of governments being like 1 child only, we need to educate people. We need to give them proper education on issues like this, on overconsumption and overpopulation, as well as providing the right sex education in school to children. If we teach young people about overpopulation, they might consider not having 6 children when they grow up. As well as we need to provide access to proper contraceptives. We need to make it more easily accessible to people throughout the entire globe, not just in one country or another, and make sure everyone has the choice whether they want to have children or not. This also includes education for family planning and reproductive health as well. So for the past couple decades, especially with environmental activists, everyone wants to talk about overpopulation overpopulation and how to, I don't know, stop population in a smart way. I don't want to say stop population, but reduce the population, I guess. But it hasn't even been until recently, like very recently, that people have brought up the idea of, maybe we should give people access to contraceptives and family planning. And again, this needs to be throughout the rest of the globe, not just in the US or one country or another. Every single person should have access to this stuff and be educated on these topics. Obviously, what should not happen is things like forced sterilization, child limits, and other things like that. That is completely unethical and wrong. Something else major too is right now in history, globally, women are having the least amount of children as ever. Because if you think about it, 100 years ago, women were having like 15 or 20 children. A lot of it was because they needed help around the farm, but also because women didn't go to school. They were uneducated. Now, women have access just as much as men to higher education, at least throughout most of the world. I know not everyone in every country has that privilege, but because of access to higher education and access to contraceptives, women aren't having as many children. So these things and overpopulation go hand in hand as well. But other barriers to having children are having no access to childcare or it being too expensive, job pressures, the expense of giving birth itself, and so forth. And what I mean by job pressures is I know a lot of women, especially in the military, feel almost guilty for having children because then their male counterparts are like, you get paid time off. You're going on vacation. You're not contributing as much to the workplace. So because of kind of that stigma, not necessarily that itself, but that can go into a woman's thoughts on whether she wants to have children or not. So it's not just positive reasons that are slowing population growth. It's these negative things too. So let's get into my final thoughts. Let's wrap this up. I still think overconsumption is the issue. But that being said, we still need to be mindful of how many children we're having. If we have the choice. I think providing contraceptives and sex education are so important throughout the whole world and help women to actually make that choice, because some women might never want to be pregnant and then they keep getting pregnant because they don't have access to this stuff. And it's not just women. Men need to have just as much knowledge on this topic as well. When people think overpopulation is the threat to climate change, the main threat, it's just lazy. Again, like I pointed out in the beginning too, it's just pointing our fingers at other people like, look at all those people over in India or China, whatever country, having 10 children. They're the reason for climate change, instead of me flying in a jumbo jet every single day, owning a big diesel truck and eating steak at every meal. It's not me. I'm not the one causing climate change. It's also brushing off the fact that it's an individual issue, climate change, and it's not. It's a collective issue. And it's really like the big corporations that are causing climate change. Like I said too, the 10% of the wealthiest people on the planet contribute to 50% of the world's CO2 emissions. So yes, overpopulation might be contributing to climate change because of those two graphs, but they might also be coincidental. I personally don't think that overpopulation should be our main fight and the thing that we should try to stop to fight climate change. I think we should still encourage education opportunities for women across the globe and provide access to sexual health care, including contraceptives, to help slow the population rise. But our energy needs to be focused on carbon sequestration and cutting emissions, or else we might not even have a planet for the projected 11 billion people in 50 years or so. Overpopulation is just a way for us in wealthy countries to not put the blame on ourselves. It gives us a reason to kind of get off the hook. I don't have to make changes. What I'm doing is fine, type of thing. It would probably be a cleaner world with 9 billion people run off of solar and wind energy than the world would be with, say, 5 billion people run off of oil and coal. I hope that you enjoyed this video, found something useful out of it, maybe learned some things. If you did, I would really appreciate a thumbs up. If you're new here, I post new content every Monday and Thursday Japan Standard Time, which is Sunday and Wednesday in the US. If you have any questions about overpopulation, let me know those questions down below. Maybe I can do another part to this video. I encourage you to check out the biodiversity series as well, because those talk about other ways that we can solve climate change without forcing people to have less children, because that's just wrong. I think having children should still be a choice, and by someone choosing not to have children doesn't make them any more environmentally better than someone who does have children, especially if that person who doesn't have children is still over consuming. I hope that you think about your consumer habits and try to think more about donating, repairing, recycling, shopping secondhand, all those other important things that I talk about here on this channel. If you found any value in this and you think it would be valuable to someone else, I would really appreciate if you shared this video with others. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit subscribe. I typically don't talk about serious topics here on my channel. I like to provide practical, easy, fun ways we can all live zero waste. But topics like these do need to be addressed because they're very important. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your time, especially if you made it all the way to the end. It really means a lot that you chose to take some time out of your day to learn more about this topic. Until next time, remember that these small changes you make have a big impact in the long run. Bye guys. Are we recording? Yep. I think that made sense. I hope that makes sense. It doesn't really outweigh being overconsumption. Currently, the US produces more CO2 per capita than Europe, whole of Europe. But I still think overconsumption will population change control. Where is that going? I am still so convinced it's overpopulated. We need to, but